Okay, Stacey, have you watched the new Roseanne?
No.
Me neither. But I do want to say this. Yes, but I want to say this. Okay, I have two main things to say. One is Donald Trump needs to be a lot less excited about her ratings because, A, he's got another job to do, it being president, but also because half of the diehard liberal people that I know in my life took a nostalgia trip and watched Roseanne. These people are not going to vote for Donald Trump in 2020. So he can be a lot less excited about the fact that a whole bunch of people watch this show.
True that. Here's what I will say. It got very good ratings, obviously.
It did.
And it actually got good critical and audience acclaim.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who watched it seemed to like it. Good for them. Because here's the other thing I want to say. Is that for everyone who's like, oh, you can't watch Roseanne because you can't support her because she's horrible. And then for all the other people who are saying, we can't be this us versus them. We have to understand what the other side is thinking. So it's incumbent upon you to watch the show. People, life is tough enough. Watch the TV you like and stop judging people for the TV shows they watch. It's the stupidest. This is why we talked about pop culture and not politics the most time, because it's just something that you can just enjoy. Just let it go. Just let people watch the shows they want to watch. It's okay. And you are not taking money out of Roseanne's pocket by not watching her show. She was already rich. Now she's richer. And you just have to deal with that.
It's why I don't go to family reunions.
Attention. Attention. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
It's Poporation. I'm Stacey. And that's Eric.
Dun-dun-dun.
Guess what we're talking about? I want to be in America. Everything free in America. For a small fee in America.
You're a racist.
I am. So we're talking about West Side Story.
And why are we talking about West Side Story
Hell if I know.
today? Well, because it's just kind of, the news has hit. It'll be a little old by the time this podcast, gets out there, but still it'll be in the works. Spielberg is planning a remake.
No, he is. He's actually casting right now.
Yes.
Latino dancers and actors.
Yes.
That's what is out in Variety magazine. I mean, that's what they're putting out right now.
So he is going to put together. So we thought, what a great time for us to revisit the original film adaptation of the Broadway musical of West Side Story. So here we are.
1961. Yeah. Which is before either of us were born.
Yes.
Which makes it really, really old, as my daughter would say, when dinosaurs roamed. So, yeah, we don't even go there. But 1961, it's 1.5 hours. And it has an intermission. Gone with the Wind has an intermission. I mean, there are movies that have intermissions, and Sound of Music had an intermission. Not every movie had an intermission, but West Side Story had an intermission.
1.5 hours.
No, it's not 1.5 hours.
It's not. It's 2.5 hours.
That's right. Sorry, my bad.
It's 2.5 hours. It's not the 4-hour Gone with the Wind.
No, you're right. It was 2.5 because I was like, 1.5, you don't have a intermission at 1.5. It's 2.5.
And when I rented it on iTunes, they took the intermission out.
I rented it on Google, and they did not. It was an intermission was in there.
All right.
But it was only for like a minute.
Yeah.
But the intermission would normally have been a 15-minute thing.
Quick little bathroom break, yeah.
Yeah, but it was, they had the card in there.
Intermission.
Yeah, but no, you're right, 2.5, not 1.5 hours. It's directed by Jerome Robbins and Robert Wise.
Also choreographed by Jerome Robbins.
Correct.
The original
And so
Broadway.
you feel like Robert was there for a lot of the acting stuff going on.
Robert Wise, who also famously directed The Sound of Music.
Correct. And Leonard Bernstein.
Wrote the music with lyrics by young upstart Stephen Sondheim.
Yes, which is obvious if you know Sondheim at all and you didn't realize that he did it. When they started singing, I'm like, did Sondheim do this? And I looked it up and he did.
Yeah.
But it's very him.
Yeah. Yeah. Very clever. Those internal rhymes. The
very
way he
real,
can rhyme something. Yeah, very real. Talking, you could actually say it, but very clever in the way that it's all put together. Sondheim is always, and Bernstein to a certain extent too, I think in this, they write things that the characters might not have said, because you need to be like genius level to come up with some of these things, but they also feel very real and very emotionally grounded. So you're okay with it because there's always nothing wrong with being clever.
Well, right. Yeah. No, it was definitely, they were character driven.
Yeah.
So the star is Natalie Wood, who was famously not a Puerto Rican, playing a Puerto Rican. Tanned her
She's
up.
a Russian.
Tanned her up.
Yeah.
Tanned her up to make her look a little darker.
Leading man base.
But they also, it looked like they put makeup on Rita Moreno and George Chakiris as well to make them a little darker.
Possibly. And also, one of the things that I found was confusing to some of my friends is that they saw pictures and they were like, oh, it's this picture of this young Puerto Rican couple in love. I'm like, no, the whole point is that Tony is not Puerto Rican, but Richard Beimer actually had kind of a darker affect. I often wonder, there's nothing in the show that says that Tony can't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And I often wonder if that might be a better choice, in some ways.
Well, it would certainly make it, in pictures, obvious that they are not from the same racial ethnicity.
I'm not saying we should cast Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez in the movie. I'm not saying that.
Oh, my God. Whoever thought that? Why would you put that out there?
That's on Twitter.
You know what?
No, that's on Twitter. It's out
karma.
there. I did not put it out there.
Karma's going to eat you.
Justin Bieber's not going to get this role. I trust Steven Spielberg not to cast Justin Bieber.
Okay, I do. It is Steven Spielberg, so I do trust him for that. But I'm like, somebody else would do it. Somebody else would do it.
Selena Gomez,
well,
I don't know. Selena Gomez, I would say, can she, I don't know.
She probably could. No, I think she's a really good actress, but...
well, because here's the other thing about the actors that we can talk about here while we're kind of running on the cast list is the actor that we're not going to mention quite yet is Marnie Nixon.
Well, it was funny because you're sitting there going, wow, she sounds like My Fair Lady. Oh, and King and I. Oh, and...
Yeah, and it's the same voice, and it's just Marnie Nixon actually, was in The Sound of Music. Her face was in The Sound of Music. She's the, she's one of the nuns. In there, she is famous for having a gorgeous voice and dubbing a lot of these old movie musicals where you needed a beautiful lyric soprano.
But she also, what made her so popular at doing that was that she was able to, Deborah Carr and Audrey Hepburn, when they're talking, they sound a little different. They're two different actresses, and they have a different style of speaking. Marnie was able, she did the voices for both of them in King and I and in My Fair Lady. And her ability was to make it sound like it was them. Mm-hmm. And so she would change. So sometimes her voice doesn't always sound exactly alike and every single time. But that was her genius, is that Marnie was able to do that. It was also kind of sucked because then you're stuck doing that. It's kind of like in Singing in the Rain when they were going to get her stuck singing for the chick. Yeah. But, so it was interesting, and my daughter I watched it with my daughters who had never seen it before, and they said and I said, well, that's Marnie Nixon, that's a woman. Natalie is lip syncing. Yeah. And they said, I would not have known because Natalie did a really good job at lip syncing to that, which is sometimes.
Marnie also did Natalie's Puerto Rican accent when she sang.
Yes, she did. It was really, she rolled her R's like, champ.
Yeah, just like Natalie did.
Yes.
And so she, I don't know that Natalie had the perfect Puerto Rican accent.
No, but Marnie
Rita
did
Moreno
hers.
Actually is Puerto Rican.
Correct.
So you could kind of, I'm looking at that as probably being the most authentic.
Yeah.
In the film.
Although I think she thickened it up.
Oh yeah, at parts.
Yeah.
But she knows what that really sounds like.
Right.
But yeah, that was a big part of what was going on. And my earlier point was, Leonard Bernstein wrote music that teenagers cannot sing. Teenagers cannot sing this score as well as we expect it to sound in West Side Story, which is why you need someone in their 30s.
I was going to say, those weren't teenagers.
No, but the characters are teenagers.
Correct. And my daughter said, I said, well, they're closer to high school than the people in Greece. And I said, well, yes, there is that.
Yes. And really, Anita and Bernardo, and we haven't really, for the completely uninitiated, we haven't really described who these people are yet, so we should do that in a minute. They can be a little bit older. I think it's important that Maria
I felt like Maria and Rita are the same. I mean, Maria and Anita are the same age. That's what I was thinking.
Anita can have a couple years on, if she were in her early 20s where Maria was like 17, 18 years old, that's fine. Because Anita's been to these dances before. Remember, this is Maria's first dance. Right, so there is a little bit of a rite of passage, this idea that Anita's been there, and Anita's dating her older brother.
Right.
So I kind of have a sense that Anita can be a little bit older. And Anita's wiser than Maria is in a lot of ways. And so I think that maybe that's a character difference, or maybe those are a couple of years.
So Richard Beymer is the leading man.
The romantic lead. The white
guy. He's Polish-Swedish mix is what they talk about.
Yeah, former gang member.
Yes.
Of the Jets.
And he has a reputation, it's mentioned.
Yes.
But we haven't gotten to the story yet. And then Russ Tamblyn, who actually right now, more famously, is really just the father of Amber Tamblyn.
Yeah.
Who is an actress, but she's also really at the forefront of a lot of the... Yeah.
If you know Russ Tamblyn at all, it's because maybe you're like me, and this is how you know both Richard Beymer and Russ Tamblyn in, closer to, they were both on Twin Peaks.
Correct. There's that too.
Yeah.
I remember Russ in Seven Brothers, which is one of, I really kind of hate that movie so much because I think I hate the story so much. Yeah. Maybe that's an episode when we talk about musicals that really should never
be remade ever.
Ever.
Okay.
Russ was in that. He played the youngest of the Seven Brothers, and it was a lot of dancing, and he's so athletic.
Yeah.
And so
in this one as well.
Exactly. He and George are the best dancers, and they both play leaders of rival gangs. Yeah. And so I guess maybe we should do the story. I mean, the story is Romeo and Juliet. What'd I say? Romeo and Juliet meet, on
the streets of New York.
On the streets of New York. I mean, they've made it a gang. It's a gangs versus gang.
And it's a white gang versus a Puerto Rican gang, which race is a huge thing. So I remember, when I was studying Romeo and Juliet, when I was a young theater major, what I would hear over and over again is this is an ancient family feud between the Montagues and the Capulets, and no one knows how it started, and it's just stupid. It exists for no reason. And one of the reasons why some people that I knew didn't like West Side Story is because they injected race into it, and therefore there was more of a reason behind the feud. And what I really got when I was watching it again this time, it's like, but that's not a reason. Like, race is a social construct, and these people are all people. And, Tony and Maria, there's absolutely no good reason why they shouldn't be allowed to pursue this romance. And so to me, it was just, I think they were making a point about racism, that it's just this pointless exercise in hatred that does nothing good in society and just hurts people. So,
and I have a comment because there are examples of exactly what you're talking about in there. But basically, so the story is Maria is sister to Bernardo, who's the leader of the Sharks gang.
The Puerto Rican gang.
And his girlfriend is Rita Moreno, who's Anita.
Yeah.
And they're going to rumble with the Jets.
The white gang.
Who is the white gang. Russ Tamblyn, Riff, is the leader of that. His best friend is Tony, who used to be a part of the gang. And at one point is mentioned, at the very beginning is mentioned, Tony has this reputation all over the West Side of being this hard-ass killer. And you don't really see that until, the rumble itself.
Yeah.
And you see his temper, which, that's something we'll talk about later. But, so anyway, but he's got a job. None of these kids have jobs except for Tony. He's trying to go
straighten up and fly right.
Looking toward the future to do something more than just hang out in a gang. So that's what's happening. And then there's a dance where they're going to actually come up with the details of where they're going to meet for the Rumble. They're going to meet at a dance and have a war council.
Yeah.
And so this is what's happening during this day as it's set up that we see during the opening that the Sharks and the Jets hate each other by a lot of dance fighting. It was really, you sit there and you go, oh, this is where Michael Jackson got it for Beat It. Gotcha. Yeah. And it was. Totally. No, it totally was. It's that stylized Fosse-esque choreography stuff. So it's very 50s, 60s.
I wondered as I was watching it, I loved it because it's so classic and it's of its time, and Jerome Robbins' choreography is iconic.
It is.
And so you're watching something that's a relic and that really worked in its day, and so you kind of look at it and you admire what they're doing out there. I wonder what Spielberg's going to do. I almost wonder if if you put some, if you brought in some choreographers who want to inject some kind of modern, almost hip-hop style dance moves in there, can you even keep the same orchestrations? Because the orchestrations are also very golden age of Broadway.
Very much so.
Very traditional orchestra who's doing all of this music. And I wonder if how much they're going to update that for the 21st century.
That's a really good question, because it is very, and you're right. There's this old school orchestration with this, at the time, new school dancing.
Yeah.
And that was part of what the whole craziness was, is that they're dancing this to this music. That's nuts.
Yeah.
So you're right. I have no idea.
Yeah. And there's street gangs doing this.
They are street gangs, which they were very clean for street gangs. I just want to throw that out there.
They wore very bright colored clothing.
They really did. But they were
popped on stage. And those white socks were just, ooh.
Everything was just very clean. I mean, even the dinginess of the playground and all, you just but it's not that dingy.
It's asphalt.
It's actually,
that's the only thing that makes it dingy.
Yeah,
it's urban,
exactly.
Because there's no green and there's no trees. But
right.
I mean, other than
that, it was the net of the basketball hoop was a real net. You know, it wasn't like chains or anything. I mean, it was interesting what they chose to make gritty and what they didn't choose to. Yeah. But it felt like, and that's part of my thing about this movie, it's very stylized.
Yes.
It's very much a piece of art.
Uh-huh.
And that's how it felt watching it, this is art of its time.
Yeah. What I noticed, the very first thing that really got me is I turn this thing on and I'm watching it, and there are no opening credits.
There are not, and that was a big deal.
But you sit there for what felt like 4 or 5 minutes,
long ass time,
and you listen to the overture. I mean, so you're really kind of, they're putting you in a Broadway theater, because in a Broadway theater, the lights go down, and people know this less now, but you're supposed to shut up when the overture starts, and you just listen to this piece of music. There is no singing, but they're going to go through,
and a lot of times it's a medley.
Yeah, they're going to go through most of the songs that are in the show. You're going to hear some melodies that are going to come back, so that, before the age of you buy the original cast recording months before you see the show, this is like, here are some of the melodies you're going to hear, so they kind of sound familiar by the time they're sung, which lands on the ear a little bit better.
But it also gets used to the style of this music that you're going to be listening to. It gets you in it's a transitioning from coming in from outside, getting your popcorn or whatever, and then, the movie starting. So
you see this very modern line drawing rendering of what you then will learn eventually as the Island of Manhattan. And you just listen to the overture, and you get, I mean, they could have put Natalie Wood's name up there. They could have put the whole cast up there. They did none of that. None of it.
And then you start with quiet as you're on a helicopter.
Yeah, aerial view
of New York, West Side Story.
Well, it starts kind of in the Lower East Side, and then it moves over to the West Side to kind of show you, here's all the cars, here's all the buildings, here's all the banks, and now we're going to, here's all the, abandoned basketball
This is where
courts.
Our story takes place.
Yeah, it takes you right there.
And it's interesting, the silence to me was also interesting.
Yeah. For a musical, it was odd. It was an odd choice.
At the very beginning. So it's a very, immediately your attention is gotten as to, this is going to be a different kind of movie.
Yeah.
This is not the musical. This is not Oklahoma.
Even though a lot of movies that we might have seen since then have probably been influenced by West Side Story, it still felt different and new and novel.
But and I guess that part of my thing is that I would, when I say it's new and different to the audience who's seeing it at that time, I will say that. I have to categorize that because it was really interesting watching it again in 2018.
Yeah.
Now, so we started with, that's the story, that's what's going on, is that it's all leading up to a big rumble. Yeah. That's the idea. In the middle of it, you've got Tony and Maria who meet at this dance. And
very dramatic, very stylized.
It was oh my God, it's so stylized. And you had basically two Richard is a singer. I don't know if he could dance or not. I don't know. We never see him dance. I don't know that he's a dancer. Natalie's not a dancer. She's not a singer. But they're in this. She's in this musical. But they meet in this dance number.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, brilliant in choreography for a pair of actors who can't dance
or don't. I mean, they can move, but I mean, they yes, it was a very.
I don't mean they don't have legs. I mean that they're not known for dancing.
But it was one of those things where they're doing everything that everybody else is doing.
Snap. Yeah, they had the other dancers dumbed down there. They're dancing. That's what happened. But it's very cute, and it doesn't stand out as, oh, they can't dance. It's just a moment of, this is because they're looking at each other the whole time.
And it's very slow and it's very subtle. And it makes its point that these two, because just like Romeo and Juliet, they have to fall in love at first sight.
Immediately.
And so because this movie does not span more than
24 hours, 24 I think, is about it. Because in 24 hours, you have 3 dead people, 1 arrested person, and a lot lot of sad people.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of damaged people. One, person
a lot of damaged
been raped
people.
And, a whole bunch of
no, there's a lot of stuff happening. So that's so anyway, that's the story. That's what we're dealing with. Yeah. And I will say this before we take a quick break. It got 11 Oscar nominations.
Yes.
And it won 10 of them.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing, especially for a musical. Uh-huh. It won Best Picture, it won Best Directors, and then of note, because as I said, it won 10. Both supporting actor and actress won. So that's George Chakiris and Rita Moreno. And then it also won cinematography. Totally deserved.
Yep.
And costumes like a mamma jamma.
Yeah.
It won, and it should have, because costume design there's just some really, which I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So the costuming choices, because it was, to me, really, really intricate to the storytelling.
Yes.
And so just a lot of really good, and I do believe that the directors
Which is why costumes should win. Costumes should win because these costumes were not only gorgeous, but they helped tell the story.
Totally.
And I think a lot of times costumes win because, that was really inventive or that was really beautiful. Irrespective of what the story was.
I agree.
I think sometimes costumes that are not the most beautiful clothes, but give you real insight into characters, those are the more deserving wins. And I wish that this is why we hate awards. But
yeah, and I'm not going to say. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm not worried about spoilers in this particular one because it's been out for over 50 years.
If you have not seen West Side Story and you want to, just stop now and come back to us later because we're going to spoil the shit out of this one.
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. But I will say, so at the very beginning for this costuming thing, I want to note, I absolutely loved at the very beginning when we see Maria, she's putting on a white dress.
Uh-huh.
She doesn't want to wear the white dress because she says white dresses are babies or whatever, but she wears this white dress. It's got a little belt of red, but she's in white. Everyone else is in colors.
Yeah.
Lots of beautiful colors, so the dancing looks wonderful. But that's when we first meet her. At the end of the movie, when she walks away, she's in a pure red dress.
Yep.
That is important.
Yep.
Because it tells you her story, what has happened to her in the last 24 hours.
Yep.
And that, to me, that just for the heroine, that's her costume story.
Yep.
And I thought that was wonderful. And I thought it was genius how it was done. Going back and then looking at each, the gangs, you see the colors. You see different colors. You know who's in what gang, not because of the color of their skin, but because of the color of the costume or how they're wearing it. And that was the genius.
Yeah. Yeah, great. A lot of great choices throughout. And I would just, while we don't like awards very much, Rita Moreno and George Chakiris, absolutely. If
anybody deserved it, they did.
Oh, my God, they were so great. And I'm kind of glad that the leads didn't win it. Actually, I don't know that I would have been that. Were they nominated?
I don't know that they were, but...
Natalie was.
No, they weren't. No, because there were 11 Oscar noms. They won 10 of them. So there was only one other nomination. They shouldn't have been. I'll be honest with you. Neither one of them should have been. I love Natalie, and I thought she did a really good job acting-wise in this, but no, I don't think she should have won.
Yeah.
Richard Beymer, I'll be honest with you, I tolerated him in this movie.
Yeah, he's fine. I mean,
and his singing, at one point, my daughter goes, "Pitchy." I'm like, yeah, he was.
Yeah.
In a musical.
But he was dubbed too. Because I read the only.
Then why dub it with a pitchy person?
Well, they weren't all dubbed throughout. Rita Moreno did a lot of her own singing, but Marnie Nixon dubbed for her at one point when there was a note she couldn't quite hit because the score is so ridiculously challenging. George Chakiris was the only actor who was not dubbed. He was lip syncing to himself, basically, because everyone was lip syncing in this movie. But his Bernardo's actually not a very tough role to sing. The notes aren't crazy and it's not that hard, and so he just did it. But yeah, I mean, there was dubbing all over the place, and maybe the pitchy part was actually Richard, but he was dubbed at some other point because Tony's got to hit some crazy notes during Something's Coming and also during Somewhere. So there's lots of and that's an issue I think for going forward. People have been talking, like all of my friends on Facebook who were saying, "Ooh, let's dreamcast West Side Story," and I'm like, okay, Spielberg is a huge name. West Side Story is a huge name. We need no other huge names. I get that people want to have a huge opening weekend, but I would so much rather get unknowns who can really just knock it out of the park because that's going to make a movie that's timeless in its and people have been talking about, well, who can sing it? And I'm like,
okay, we're going to get to this later. We're jumping ahead.
Yeah.
We're jumping ahead. Let's get there later.
Okay.
We'll be back in a minute. We're talking about it. We're talking about why Spielberg is going to do it, another version of it, and we'll talk about ideas for it.
Yeah.
But here's my question: is okay, why? Why do it again? I mean, well, first of all, why was it a hit at the time? Because it was. It was on Broadway first.
Yep.
Then it was a movie made, and then of course it's run on Broadway or off Broadway or touring. Yeah. Somebody's always doing it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Most musicals are based on something else. And this was quasi based on Romeo and Juliet, but this isn't Romeo and Juliet the musical.
It's not. But it's very
in Italy. It's very clearly based on the same thing with a few differences, a few really important differences. One, I know that you never meet the parents.
You don't. You really don't. You barely hear. I think at some point maybe somebody calls her name and she goes, "Oh, my mama." But it's mostly her just kind of motioning, saying something to someone that you never hear. Yeah. It's not even Charlie Brown's teacher.
Yeah. But Anita and Bernardo discuss the parent. The parents are there. They're like living in the same building, but they're just not. And I don't know where Tony's parents are, or Riff's or anybody else's. So unlike the whole Montague and the Capulet thing where it's set up in these families, the gangs are the families this time. And so it's a family of peers, and that's a little different. The whole Montague Tybalt thing plays out almost exactly the same in West Side Story as it does in Romeo and Juliet. But what's a very key difference between the two, and spoiler, here we go, is that Juliet does not die at the end of this one.
Correct.
Maria gets up and walks away.
Yes.
And that's huge. And I was actually, knowing that this was Romeo and Juliet recast as this gang story in the West Side of New York, I was shocked. And not only that, nobody commits suicide in this version. No one offs themselves. Now, Tony does run through the street going, "Chino, come get me, come kill me." So it's kind of quasi-suicidal behavior. But unlike Romeo and Juliet, no one actually takes a knife or pills or a gun to themselves and blows themselves away.
So here's what I think. I think that I do think it's a little bit, I get what you say the differences are, but I think the differences are there because it was 1961 and they were trying to be modern. So there are no parents around because this was the baby boomer generation. So the parents, they are trying to get away from that. A movie that's going to be popular for the baby boomers is not going to have a lot of parental guidance in it. Then, yes, when Tony is running around saying, "Please kill me," I think that is his suicide attempt because he thinks that she's already dead. So there is that same misunderstanding. Yeah. And so he is trying to commit suicide.
In Romeo and Juliet, they both kill themselves because they either believe or know that the other one is dead.
Correct.
Romeo thinks Juliet's dead. In fact, sees her body.
Yes, and thinks
kills
she's
himself.
Dead.
She wakes up. There's a little,
wah.
sees Romeo dead, and then kills herself. And then at the end, you have these two dead bodies on stage, and the families finally say, "Oh, we're reunited."
Right.
That's the other thing that doesn't really happen in this is that the Maria gives everyone a nice speech at the end about how hatred is ruining the world, but you don't get the idea that the Jets and the Sharks are going to shake hands and get along.
Nothing has been solved. Yeah. Nothing has been solved, and I think that goes toward the trying to make it this modern version.
Yeah.
And so here's the deal. It was a hit. I think the subject, the racism.
Yep.
Which, thankfully we fixed that.
Oh, we're completely non-racist these days.
So we're post-racism now.
Isn't that great?
But at the time, it was a big deal.
That's sarcasm, people. In case, don't add us. Don't add us on Twitter. Like, we get it. Shut up.
But it was young actors. These were hot young actors that they had in here. Rita Moreno, she has done Broadway stuff, but everybody was up and coming.
Yeah.
And by the way, just a fun note, George Chakiris, do you know where you could have seen him, like, literally every year?
Yes, I do, because it's my favorite thing every year when Rosemary Clooney sings, "Mister, you didn't do right by me." I'm like, look, it's Bernardo.
It's Bernardo.
And he's so hot, even then. Oh, my God.
Well, he was so pretty.
Yes.
And he stands out in that particular movie. White Christmas is what we were talking about. And then, of course, this was, again, up and coming.
Yep.
That, you had to do those things with Rosemary Clooney and dance around her. And then you get to do Bernardo.
And I don't know if he stands out just because he's Bernardo and he's so new to it, or he's that
He's
pretty.
really good looking.
Oh,
I think it's because he was pretty.
Oh, he's so hot.
He's really pretty.
I loved him in this. He could have,
But they're also, the songs are beautiful.
Yes.
Somewhere, it's just lovely. It's old school, as we've mentioned before, but it is beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
And then don't even the dancing.
Yeah.
This movie, to me, if I had to say I would say it's about the dancing. If without the dancing, you're missing half of what it could have been.
And it's dancing, it's the kind of the street dancing of the gangs, but there's also this wonderful Puerto Rican influence, this Latin influence.
Thankfully.
When on top. So here's what I want to say about the music, but also about kind of the racism angle, is that you start off this movie, and I think they made this movie primarily for white audiences.
Oh, yeah.
Because like everything in 61 was made for a white audience.
It's definitely coming from a white perspective.
But you start with the Jets, right? And the Jets are all over the street. And you see the Sharks, and they're this kind of scary, dark-skinned other. This gang gets into a fight, and you know that both sides are itching for a fight. So they take the smallest excuse to actually start to have this big fight. The cops show up, break it up, and then they say, okay, let's meet at the dance and decide where we're going to have a rumble. That's kind of your setup. Mm-hmm. Then Riff goes to Tony to say, hey, we're going to have a rumble. You have to rejoin us. And Tony's like, I really don't want to. He's like, just come to the dance tonight, which is how you get Tony to this dance where he meets Maria. Then you see Maria and Anita, and you're like, okay, well, I like the two of them, but the Sharks are still this other thing, right? You get to the dance, all this happens. It's not until you get to the rooftop after the dance when America happens, which is one of the best numbers in the entire show. And
one of the most well-known. People know this song because it's been used in a lot of different commercials and whatnot.
But you spend a great deal of time suddenly in that Puerto Rican community. You get their sense of humor. You get their humanity. I found myself being really weirdly moved in a way I probably shouldn't have been, because America is just a really fun song. But what struck me is that even in 1961, all of us knew how wrong racism was. We just knew, because look at these people and look at their hopes and their dreams and their humanity, and it's all right there. And yet still, as you say, jokingly, years and years and years and years later, we're having immigration fights about Latin people coming to this country still, and they're being called murderers and rapists, and we're having all these ridiculous conversations.
You listen to the words of America. Okay, the first time you see it, you might just enjoy America because of the dancing and all of the back and forth and all of that.
And it's funny.
But here's the deal. Listen to the words. The words could have been written yesterday about literally any kind of non-white group.
Yeah.
And it was a little eerie because I was focusing on that, watching it this time, because it was so modern. The words.
Yeah.
We've heard everything, and I'm like, wait a minute. You're saying that 50 years ago, the same exact, we have not moved one single inch.
Yeah.
It was that kind of a feeling.
But do you know the lyrics were rewritten for the movie? The lyrics in the original Broadway show were not exactly the same. So if you Google original Broadway cast lyrics, there's a few differences in there, mostly because they changed it because they made Puerto Rico just sound awful.
Yes.
And it was really that a lot of people felt, looking at it, that it was really kind of an anti-Puerto Rican thing, and it was a little bit too kind to this great. So they added in a bunch of lyrics where Bernardo and the men sing about racism.
Yes.
And that's the first time that didn't happen in the original show. It was basically about, do you like Manhattan or do you like Puerto Rico? And Puerto Rico's a piece of shit is what you kind of got.
Well, and part of the only thing I remember that was really anti-Puerto Rico is when Rita Moreno says, I hope it just falls into the ocean and it goes away. And I remember going, oh, that's harsh. But yes, but also, didn't recently or somebody translated. They did a whole version where they translated it.
Well, yes, that's the other piece about the remake and why remake it that we might get to in a bit.
Right,
because there has been a recent new production of the stage show with a lot of Spanish language brought back into, which I love that idea because it does make it more authentic to this particular community. They're an immigrant community. They spoke Spanish back on the island of Puerto Rico. And so they would naturally, and I think a lot of their conversation is even peppered with Spanish. Of course, in a film, you can just subtitle that stuff while you're doing it. And that, I think that's going to add a whole different flavor to this.
If he does that.
Yeah. I think
it didn't necessarily work on the stage because you have a lot of people who are not speaking Spanish.
And I don't know whether they use super titles or not, or whether they
My understanding is that they didn't.
Or whether they just kind of do an "Oh Dios mío" every once in a while just so you get it, and you kind of get the story.
Not on the version that they closed down because it wasn't because people just it didn't work. It didn't work is what
the Broadway superfans that I know who saw it said it was brilliant.
Okay,
they loved it. So I mean, but again, these people love everything. So that's fine. I think I think it's a great choice for a movie, especially because subtitles are so easy to do on film. It'll give it some authenticity.
Here's what I want to say. Yes and no. The thing about so on film, yes, you can put subtitles in. So I get that, and that's fine. The thing about doing it on stage is that I guess it's who you want to come see it. And if you're trying to do that thing where you are entertaining and maybe educating at the same time, which this story seems to want to do,
a little bit,
then if you're putting it out there, then it's the ones that you want to educate who can't understand it. That's my issue with that. That's all well and good that they're speaking real Spanish and doing what, like in a documentary would be going on.
Sure.
But that means that Joe Blow in the MAGA hat, I'm not saying he would have come, but if he did, is he going to understand?
West Side Story is a Broadway classic. People might come.
Okay, but I want him to understand. I want him to hear it, and that means it's going to have to be in English. I'm sorry. That's just
I think most of it's going to be in English no matter what. Most of it's going to be in English no matter what. But I think peppering, again, there's
peppering is different Spanish, from having the whole of America sung in Spanish.
Sure, and I don't think it will be. Because even on the new show, like it was maybe a third of the lyrics were kind of, they would do it. And maybe you missed a joke here and there. But doing it on, I don't think that's going to be a defining feature of the new film. It'll just make it a little bit more authentic and a little bit more real to those characters. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like we said before, in 1961, this was really made for a white audience. I wonder if that lens is going to be a little bit different. I wonder if they're going to try to make a movie that's going to make a Latin audience really happy with the way that this is being depicted and even market it a little bit towards that community, which there's a lot more dollars in the Latin American movie-going community than there were in 1961. Yeah. And that might be an interesting way to go. Well,
and here's my question for you. So looking at this, the 1961 version, so what still works for you? It was an interesting experience watching it in 2018.
The humor still works. I mean, it's not a comedy, but I mean, looking at America, just kind of talking about that. The dynamic between Anita and Bernardo was just delightful.
There were a lot of funny lines. There are a lot of funny lines.
There's some moments in that. The humanity of the characters really came through to me. The dancing is spectacular, but it's of a time. Mm-hmm. So that was yes and no. The score is just so fucking gorgeous. I mean, I was humming so many of those songs for the next 4 days.
My daughters kept saying, "Oh, I've heard that before." Yeah, you have.
Yeah,
you have.
Yeah,
and that's because it is a classic.
And it kind of occurred to me that like most of the great songs that we hear over and over and over again happened before that kind of fateful rumble. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, no, there was like, I heard a bunch of songs even after, and I'm like, and that's a beautiful one too, and that's a beautiful one too. Yeah. It just, there is like Romeo and Juliet, and one of the things that I learned in theater school was that Romeo and Juliet is framed as a very traditional comedy up until there's this turn of events that changes everything.
Correct.
About halfway through, and then it's a tragedy. And this falls a little bit on the same lines.
It totally does, I think.
You can believe this is a romantic comedy until certain irrevocable things happen at that rumble. 2 people die, and the stakes have suddenly gone way the fuck up.
Yeah.
And this is not going to end well.
Yes. No, you're exactly right. You're going along one way thinking it's this kind of a movie, and then suddenly it takes a very different turn.
So all of that still works for me.
I think the costumes work as well as a period piece.
Yeah.
Okay, they're just absolutely gorgeous. I don't know that still works as well in watching it was the stylized directing.
Yeah.
It felt very dated. I get that at the time it was just so new and novel and cool.
Yep.
But a lot of it felt forced.
I also wonder
the pretty fight dancing. It just felt, and again, part of that is that I was around in the 80s when we watched, all of these videos that were being made, that what the videos were doing, especially in the early 80s, was pulling from movies.
Sure.
So Beat It did obviously take from this.
I also wonder if we're watching a movie from a time when Broadway shows didn't run for 12 years. Wicked is still on stage. The Phantom of the fucking Opera is still on Broadway, right? I mean, if you haven't seen this show yet, come on. So West Side Story was a huge hit, and I don't even know if it was still playing in New York when the movie was made 3 years later. And so for a lot of folks, watching West Side Story is as close as they're going to see to seeing the Broadway show, and perhaps what Jerome Robbins, especially who also directed the Broadway show, wanted to do was say, here's what you didn't see on Broadway.
Here's a theatrical experience.
Let's give you lots of really wide shots with all of this great dancing, and let's give you the spotlights at the dance so that we do this very stylized way that Tony and Maria meet. I want to give audiences that experience because not everyone can go to New York and see a Broadway show. And
you may be true on that but again, that lends itself to the stylization of it.
Sure.
But it also makes it dated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is it just kind of goes whoomp, and okay, so it's the 60s, the late 50s, early 60s.
Now, Spielberg's going to have to make some different choices, I think, if he wants this movie to resonate in 2019 or 2020 or whenever it is it's going to come out.
But this changed. I mean, this was, at the time, it was cutting edge.
Oh, very.
The dancing was cutting edge. The choreography was cutting edge. And we mentioned the credits. So the opening credits, none.
Yep.
None. But the closing credits, which I'll be saying, I think this did survive. I think this was cool, was the graffiti.
Yeah.
It's just a graffiti wall, and they just kind of focus on the different names as they go through the...
Yep.
I thought that was lovely.
Yeah, it worked.
Now, what's interesting about that, during the movie, you didn't see a lot of graffiti. So it was a little jarring in that, and suddenly we got all of this.
You did see the word Jets painted on the street.
But and you saw a wall that would have the word Jets, and then this guy is painting a shark eating it, but literally nothing else was on that wall.
Yeah.
It was just the word Jets and a shark picture. I mean, it was a very clean,
Sure.
ghetto. And which I didn't think worked.
With
I didn't
really
think
pretty
that
people.
It was very pretty people for people who are malnutritioned and have been beaten all their lives by their crack.
George Takiris has really great hair.
Everybody had great hair. Everybody had great hair.
Now, did you notice? So I looked at the trivia section of the IMDb after I finished watching it just to see if I could find anything interesting. The most interesting piece to me is that one of the sharks, one of the guys who plays one of the members of the Puerto Rican gang, his sister plays Riff's girlfriend. His real life sister played the redhead who is the Italian
Yes, I remember her.
Yeah. Her brother, off-screen brother actually played one of the sharks.
Wow.
And this is how, it's just, and it all went by look, right? And so if you put a red wig on her, she looked exactly like she belonged right there with Riff,
She looked Italian, though. She looked more Irish to me, but that's okay because of the red hair.
She was meant to be an
She
Italian.
was white. That's what they needed her to be white.
Yeah.
So that's what they did.
And I also, it's interesting that Robert Wise wanted the Jets and the Sharks to have some animosity between them, so kept them apart on set most of the time, wouldn't really encourage them to commune with each other as a company of actors. He wanted the Sharks to bond and he wanted the Jets to bond. But then somebody said there was at least one pair of, the housing they put them up in. There was one shark that was rooming with a Jet. And of course, my gay mind went, I wonder what that was all about.
Indeed. Here's what I'm going to say. We mentioned about the whole... her speech at the end being the only time when, she gave a speech, then she walked away in her red dress, and, and then that's the end.
If you didn't get the point of the movie, Maria will tell you what the point is.
Exactly. It's like every He-Man episode. There's a moral at the end.
And yet it was done in a way that it was true to the character.
But here's what I say. There's a fun scene when they're at the pharmacy or the drugstore.
The soda shop, yeah.
Soda shop. I don't remember anything about a soda. But anyway, so they're at the soda shop, and they're talking about the Rumble. It's going to come up. And there's a dartboard in there and everything. And suddenly the cop comes in. And they get a warning that the cop's coming, so they all start acting like they're friends.
Yep.
They sit down at the table together, and they're playing darts together, and you see them all acting. And the cop comes in, and he's talking, and he's saying, when's the Rumble? And they're like, no, there isn't one, yada, yada. But what was fun about that is that it was making the statement that, you see, you could get along. You could be these people. And as soon as the cop goes away, of course, they all, get back to their sides again. But there was that lovely little moment that was very much a symbol of saying, you see, you could.
Yeah. And it's a choice.
It's a choice.
It's a choice not to.
And but again, there was this part of what I think is kind of dated is a naivete. That was part of it. Her speech at the end is part of it.
Yeah.
And then obviously her relationship with Tony. I mean, they're naive. Even within the movie, they're fucking naive.
Yeah.
So it's just double naivete.
Yeah.
But so that to me also, my daughters are more worldly than half the characters in there. Half of the gang members in there.
Here's my question for you. Yes, we hear that Tony's got this reputation of being this, ruthless killer, right? Which as soon as you meet him, he's like a pile of goo.
Oh, you sit there and my gaydar kind of went off. I'm just saying. I'm just
waiting for, that something's coming is not a song that a ruthless killer would sing.
No.
So right away I'm going, what?
Yeah.
I wonder if the fact that two people who were the Mercutio Tybalt stand-ins in West Side Story, the fact that they both died at the Rumble, and you end, and that's Act 1, right, in the musical, is that you have these two bodies that are just on stage and the curtain closes on two dead bodies. Were the Jets and the Sharks shocked that people actually died? I mean, they're talking about, are we going to bring guns? Are we going to bring knives? Are we going to bring this? But I don't think they expected anyone to die.
No, and at one point on the Jets side, I think it was Baby, the kid. Baby says, I didn't think anybody was going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Well, which is one thing when they were talking about what if they say they're going to bring pipes? What if they say they're going to bring belts or guns and that sort of thing? They were like, oh no, not gun. I mean, there was like a line.
Yeah.
We aren't going to we're not here to kill them. We're here to get them out of our territory. Yeah. That is what the idea was, which I do think is naive. I think it was naive back in 1961, but I think that's what you put in a movie if you want a whole family to come see it.
Yeah.
You don't make it that they're trying to kill each other, because that also lends to the pathos at the end when somebody does die. Real blood is shed. They're having to deal with the fact that they were a part of it. There's some lovely moments in the moment where they're sitting there deciding how are we going to fight? Is going to be, hand to hand, and then somebody says or belts, and then they start upping it, and it goes pipes, and then it goes to knives, and then it goes to guns, and
then Tony shows up and makes sure that it's a clean fight, no weapons, 1-on-1. Period.
Right now,
he does that for Maria.
Correct, and he does. She says stop the fight, and so that's what he goes to do, and then he does a shitty job of it. Here's what happens.
If he didn't show up to the Rumble, it would have been fine.
It probably would have been fine, because what happens then is it happens, and Riff gets shot.
Yep.
And then Tony loses his fucking mind. Yep. So we see, that's the one and only time that we see where he might have had a reputation. Before that, he's been this lamb person.
Yes.
Fairly passive, actually. And suddenly we see this, which also, here's my comment I referred to earlier, in that, so he goes into this blind rage, literally, because he kills his girlfriend's
older brother,
which you can't come back from that.
No.
You can't come back from that.
He kind of does.
He totally does.
Them, immediately.
Because that was ridiculous too. That's another thing that's dated and it doesn't go down well. But when he's doing that, you see this this blind rage, and I'm sitting there going, okay, that doesn't bode well for Maria if she's married. If he's fine and calm, I can see him losing his shit. Yeah. With her. But again, that's me thinking in 21st century terms, as far as, is this a man you want to get married to? Which again, that was dated. My daughters are like, they have known each other for 2 hours. Yeah. And they are sitting here acting like they're getting married. And, 3 hours later, they've had sex.
And in fact, Romeo and Juliet did get married, and the stand-in in West Side Story is they pretend to get married in the bridal shop where Maria works, but that's supposed to be a symbolic marriage. That
because
was like,
then they have sex after
gives them permission to boink.
Correct. And there's that. Another moment that, and again, it comes to the stylized directing, is when Anita is looking for Tony to give him a message from Maria.
Which is bullshit. She never would have done that. Her boyfriend just got killed by Tony. But go ahead. But
also, here's the thing. When Anita... this is another unbelievable. So the whole thing is that she comes in, and the idea is that she's almost raped by the Jets.
Yep.
And it's stopped by the old man. But I had a problem because there were two moments when they said, we don't know where he is, he's not here, and they say, go on, leave. She would have.
Yeah.
Any woman alone, a rival gang of your brothers, you would have turned the fuck around and left.
Yeah.
She didn't. She was going to go past them to look for Tony.
Yeah.
I did not believe that. Now, it had to happen for the story, okay? But I did not believe that, and that jumped out at me, and I just kind of went, that wouldn't have happened.
So here's another thing I wanted to bring up about this movie, speaking about watching it with 21st century eyes, is anybody's. The young, female identified at birth, I should say, girl who wants to be a jet.
Right.
I really wonder, is she the first transgender character in a mainstream movie in American history? I think she was trans before we had a word for that. I think if transgender was a word that was bandied about in 1961, that would have been her. She wanted to be a member of that gang, and she really kind of wanted to be a boy.
She did. You're right. And I think that they were putting it down as just being a lesbian, but I think you're right. It probably goes
tomboy.
Or a tomboy, but it was more than a tomboy. She was binding herself. I mean, you could see that in her tank top.
Yeah.
You could see that she had put something there.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I do. I hadn't thought of that until just now, because I was just saying, oh, that's their version of a lesbian. But I think you're right. It goes more than that was and honestly, for that time to even have that character, you didn't have to have that character, but they chose to, and it was
that's not a Romeo and Juliet throwback.
No.
There's nothing in Romeo and Juliet about it.
Again, that was them modernizing it.
Sure.
And I give them props for that. But again...
and it's a very respectful portrayal, actually. It is interesting that when Anita came in and the rape was happening, anybody's was horrified and was not participating. You know, and that was my question, is anybody's going to get in there and start doing this? And she was by the wall, and I say she because we didn't know about, Well,
that's how they were treating her. They were calling her a she. That's why they wouldn't let her do anything.
She was calling herself a she because she didn't know any better.
Yeah, that was how it was.
In 61.
Yeah.
But so we'll just, we'll use those pronouns. But she was kind of she was totally back with the gang. As soon as they were ushered out, she was with the gang. Once she'd proven herself as being a good member of the gang and they were willing to have her, she was in like Flint. She wanted in there, which is just fascinating.
But again, it's one of those where I do look forward to see what Steven Spielberg is going to do. Will I go see it? Yeah, I'll go see it.
Oh, I'll totally go see it. I'm going to be there on opening
because
night.
It's fascinating. But I will tell you, I don't know how many times I need to see the 1961 again. It was. I think it's a classic. I think everybody should see it once. I totally do. Yeah. I totally do. If only for the wonderful things we talked about: Rita Moreno, the costumes, the dancing, the music. If only for some of those things.
Just to look at George Takei's face.
Oh my God! I'm going to say this because I'm not an ass person, but he has a really fine behind.
Oh God, he's got to find everything. He's got to.
He's got a nice dancer's. But anyway, moving on. Point being.
Let's talk about ass.
But we digress. I think it is worth seeing, so that goes along with this season's theme. But I don't know if I have to see it again. If it's a lot of a dated thing.
It's 2.5 hours, and it's not. This does not have a happy ending.
But that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. That's what it is.
Exactly.
And going in.
If you know anything about Romeo and Juliet, you're not
exactly.
Gonna be,
and they describe it as a Romeo. When it's part of its description, somebody's dying.
But the music is gorgeous, and the people are pretty, and the costumes are fabulous, and so much is right with it. I don't know that I need to see it again, but I certainly would. This is probably my third or fourth time seeing it, and I don't know that I need to see it again tomorrow. But if in 3 or 4 years, if one of my... See, I do a lot of what I call education with my younger gay friends who just haven't seen things that they really need to see.
Well, no, that's it. I get that.
And so if I needed to sit them down one night and say, oh, we are watching West Side Story, I would totally see it again.
Well, this
I
is
would.
one reason. My thing was my daughters. This was a classic that they had to see at least once. So that was part of this. But and I'm assuming that they'll do this for any children that they may or may not have. But I myself, Stacey, I've seen it enough now. I've seen it several times, and I don't need to because as I said, it's good. It's a classic. I think everyone should see it once. But it's not one of those that I'm going to pull out.
But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Steven Spielberg comes up with.
I'm fascinated to see how that's going to roll.
So partly I'm going because I'm curious, and also I really like West Side Story as a piece of work. So I'm hoping it's great, and I will also laugh and cry and be moved and be a different person.
On the other hand, I will listen to the soundtrack.
Sure.
Movie I can't stomach necessarily a lot of, but the soundtrack is divine.
Yeah.
So that's West Side Story here on Pop-Oration. We say it should be a hit. I don't even know why I said that.
2 thumbs up. Oh my God.
I hope it wins some awards.
Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe to the show, and please tell your friends if you enjoyed this episode. Come back and see us. And
if you didn't enjoy it, don't tell them at all. Don't tell them that at all.
Just don't mention it. There's no need. You don't have to do that.
Don't be negative.
You don't got to do that. You just don't have to be that way. Why do you got to do that? Bye.
You've been listening to Pop-Oration with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Pop-Oration Room. Check out our website at popoperationroom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.